Hello my dear friends, welcome back to my channel Score Points. In the previous videos we have learned about the male reproductive and female reproductive unit of a flower. In this video we are going to learn about pollination. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of a pistil. You can see the diagram on the board. Pollinators like honeybees or insects or even birds can help in pollination. Depending upon the source of pollen grains, pollination is of three types. One, it's autogamy. Other one, it's geitonogamy. Third one is xenogamy or allogamy. We can learn about each of them in detail. First one, it's autogamy. Transfer of pollen grains from anther to the stigma of the same flower. So pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. This is called as autogamy. Example is pea, rice, wheat, etc. This is a kind of self-pollination. Autogamy is a kind of self-pollination. Some plants such as viola, which is common pansy, oxalis, camelina, they produces two types of flowers, chasmogamous and cleistogamous flowers. Chasmogamous flowers are flowers that are similar to the flowers of other species with exposed anther and stigma. That means the chasmogamous flowers are those flowers which has exposed anther and stigma. You can see the diagram of chasmogamous flower. Next is cleistogamous. The flowers that do not open at all. Anther and stigma lies very close to each other. These types of flowers are called as cleistogamous flowers. You can see the closed flower structure on the board. Inside these structures you have anther and stigma and they are very close to each other. Chasmogamous flower, cleistogamous flower. Now we can learn the difference between chasmogamous and cleistogamous flowers. Chasmogamous flowers are those flowers which has exposed anther and stigma. There are no chances for cross-pollination. It requires pollinators for pollination. Example, hibiscus is a chasmogamous flower. Cleistogamous flowers, the flowers that do not open at all. Anther and stigma lies very close to each other. There is no chance for cross-pollination. Assured seed set even in the absence of pollinators. Example, camelina. Plants such as viola, which is common pansy, oxalis and camelina can produce both chasmogamous and cleistogamous flowers. Next type of pollination that you have to learn, it's geitonogamy. The transfer of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to stigma of another flower of the same plant, it's called as geitonogamy. Example, cucurbita. Functionally, it is a cross-pollination. It involves pollinating agents, but genetically it is autogamy since pollen grains come from the same plant. Now we can see the diagram of geitonogamy. The pollen grains from the anther, it's transferred to the stigma of another flower of the same plant. Next type of pollination that you have to learn is xenogamy or allogamy. The transfer of pollen grains from anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower of a different plant is called as xenogamy or allogamy. This is the only type of pollination which during pollination brings genetically different types of pollen grains to the stigma. Agents for pollination. There are two types of agents, abiotic and biotic agents. Abiotic, it's non-living factors like wind and water. Biotic, these are animals like reptiles, mammals, insects and birds that helps in pollination. These animals are pollinators that carry pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower. The form of pollination in which pollen grains are distributed by water, it's called as hydrophily or water pollination. Water pollination is very common among algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes and some angiosperms. Pollen grains are prevented by wetting by mucilaginous covering. Example, Vallisneria and Hydrilla. Vallisneria and Hydrilla are submerged freshwater hydrophytes in which hydrophily is observed. So you can see the diagram of Vallisneria. In Vallisneria, the female flower reaches the surface of water by the long stalk and the male flower or pollen grains are released onto the surface of water. They are carried passively by water currents Some of them eventually reaches the female flower and the stigma. In Vallisneria, the female flower stalk is coiled to reach the water surface to receive the pollen which is carried by the water currents, and pollen grains are protected from wetting by presence of mucilaginous covering. Zostera is a marine seagrass that is pollinated by hydrophily. In another group of water pollinated plants such as seagrasses, female flowers remain submerged in water and the pollen grains are released inside the water. Pollen grains in many such species are long, ribbon-like, and they are carried passively inside the water. Some of them reach the stigma and achieve pollination. In most of the water pollinating species, they are protected by the mucilaginous covering. In a majority of aquatic plants such as water hyacinth and water lily, the flowers emerge above the level of water and are pollinated by insects or wind, as in most of the land plants. Adaptations for water pollination or hydrophily. Pollens are long, needle-like or ribbon-like and are carried passively by water. Pollen grains are protected from wetting by the presence of mucilaginous covering. The form of pollination in which the pollen grains are transferred with the help of wind. It's called as anemophily or wind pollination. Pollen grains are light in weight, non-sticky and dry and winged. The form of pollination in which wind transfers the pollen, it's called as anemophily or wind pollination. So you can see the diagram of a wind pollinated plant. Adaptations for wind pollination or anemophily. Pollen grains are light in weight, non-sticky, dry and winged. Stamens are well exposed for easy dispersal of pollen grains in the wind. Stigma is sticky, large and feathery to trap pollen grains floating in the air. Numerous flowers are packed together to form inflorescence. We can see the examples for wind pollinated plants. Next type of pollination that you have to learn is insect pollination or entomophily. The form of pollination in which insects distribute the pollen, it's called as entomophily or insect pollination. Majority of flowering plants use a range of animals as pollinating agents. Bees, butterflies, flies, beetle, etc. are insect pollinators. Adaptations for insect pollination or entomophily. Flowers are large, sticky and bright color. They have honey and nectar glands which are highly fragrant to attract the insects. The pollen grain surface is sticky due to the exine layer and stigma is sticky due to the mucilaginous secretion. The flowers offer floral rewards like nectar and pollen grains for pollination to insects. In some species, the floral rewards are providing safe place to lay eggs. Example, Amorphophallus. The flowers sometimes secrete foul odor to attract insects like flies and beetles. Now we can see some examples for pollinating agents. Bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, lizards like gecko lizard and garden lizards are common examples of pollinating agents. Floral rewards. Nectar and pollen grains are the usual floral rewards in some flowering species. Floral rewards are providing safe place to lay eggs. Example, tallest flower of Amorphophallus. The flower itself is 6 feet in height. Relationship between species of moth and the plant yucca. Among the insects, bees are the dominant pollinating agents. Insects usually visit the flower and they come in contact with the anther and stigma. The body of the animal gets a coating of the pollen grains which are generally sticky in animal pollinated flowers. When the animals carry the pollen on its body, come in contact with the stigma, it brings about pollination. Tallest flower, Amorphophallus. The flower itself is 6 feet in height. Relationship between species of moth and the plant yucca, where both species, moth and the plant, cannot complete their life cycle without each other. That is, there exists a mutual relationship between the two species. The moth deposits its egg in the locule of the ovary and the flower in turn get pollinated by moth. The larvae of the moth come out of the egg as the seeds are developing. Now we can see the plot for the above session about pollination and different types of pollination. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe. Keep learning and score points with Score Points.